Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our weekly Tuesday live streams just for men. I think I've decided what I'm going to call the program. I think what we're just going to do, we're just going to continue with the Spirit of Liberty, but we're going to call it the men's edition because I haven't been able to think of a better idea, and I just still like the Spirit of Liberty. But we're just going to keep these Tuesday afternoons geared towards topics for men, and so we're going to jump right into it today. Not planning on doing a real long show. I do want to do a little commercial for the possible next week's. So I'm hoping, I don't know for sure, in the next week's, I'm hoping to be having some guests on because we have guest speakers coming in for the next 4 weeks. Now, if I do that, they won't be live. I'll still premiere them Tuesday at noon, but the big thing is just going to be trying to work out a time where we can record. And so while I have not really scheduled that in, I'm hoping to be able to make that happen while I'm going to be having different pastors in here in person. I would like to just have them in here with me and talk about some of these subjects. So hopefully over the next week, we will be having some guests on the show talking about some topics for men. So we will kind of play that by ear, but you might notice the title today is Toxic Masculinity. Toxic Masculinity. That's something, I think it was about 2 years ago when people started using that term. There was a famous Gillette ad that was absolutely ridiculous where they used that term, toxic masculinity. It started getting thrown around all over the place. And I still occasionally will hear that brought up, and it's always end up that term is used to just really try to attack masculinity. And obviously, there are things that men do that are bad, but masculinity isn't the problem. It's just a sin nature that's a problem. But what our society is doing today, they're doing everything they can to just strip manhood from men and just turn them into these just queer, effeminate types. And that is not the solution. That is not right. That's not what we're looking for. And you might have noticed I, shamelessly used the latest talking point with the Will Smith, Chris Rock picture. And the reason I decided to use that, what kind of made me think of this, is, of course, everybody saw that 1 minute of the Oscars. I didn't even know the Oscars was going on, didn't care. Nobody cared. And this one event happened that everyone has seen. A lot of people think it was staged. I don't know. Either way, I'm always glad to see a Hollywood elite get slapped. But if it was staged, I think it's pretty funny. Shows how desperate they are to be relevant, because the Oscars and really anything popular, everything from the Oscars to the Super Bowl to, anything, it's so politicized anymore. And it's absolutely revolting, and it's always used to just promote every bit of left-wing filth in the world. And I hate it. I'm disgusted by it. I'm not interested in watching any of that stuff. I tried watching a little bit of the Olympics last year, quit watching it because it was all politically motivated junk. I want to watch sports. I don't want to see stuff about Black Lives Matter and about pro-LGBT stuff. I want to watch sports, okay? And so, but anyway, I started seeing all these things about toxic masculinity again, because apparently that is what motivated Will Smith to slap Chris Rock. Now, I'm going to read a couple articles to you that I saw on this subject, and because people do get confused on this subject, because when people talk about toxic masculinity, there are things that are brought up that are bad. Men often do treat women really bad and disrespectfully. There's abusive men out there, and there is inappropriate behavior that is very common in men. But the world has come up with their solution is not a solution. And so on one hand, you have, the libtards out there, wanting the guys to be more queer and effeminate. And then, on the other side, you have like your Joe Rogan types and stuff that have talked about some of this stuff where they don't have a solution either. They'll just talk like all macho, pound the chest, and act like these things are okay. But no, there actually is a solution to all this stuff that I want to get to, and I think it's very important that we understand these things. But let's kind of kick this off by taking a look at these articles. So this was from the LA Times, and it says Will Smith's attack on Chris Rock shows toxic masculinity boiling over. And it says it was the slap felt round the world. Will Smith, one of the biggest movie stars on the planet, walked on stage and slapped comedian Chris Rock during the 94th Annual Academy Awards in front of a live, mostly white audience. Now, why do they have to bring stuff like that up all the time? A live, mostly white audience. I wonder if that's why it's popular. In fact, I had somebody on Twitter who came after me acting like, because I'm just going to admit it. I enjoyed seeing Chris Rock get slapped. I think the guy's an idiot, okay? I also think Will Smith is psycho and mentally unstable, okay? So I will admit that, but then he just acted like, you're just enjoying this black on black violence, okay? It had nothing to do with their colors, but at the same time, this individual who wrote this article, who, by the way, happens to be a black man, and not only that, something else we're going to see too, it's like he has to point out it's a mostly white audience, because we're going to slip in there too that everyone's racist, and that's why they enjoyed this, okay? And all I'll say is, there's plenty of white people I would like to see Will Smith slap too. So had nothing to do with that. But anyway, it says it was so outrageous that many people initially thought it was a joke, part of the script. But then Smith returned to his seat, yelled to Rock, "Keep my wife's name out of your mouth." Those of us who saw it live were shocked. Toxic masculinity can indeed abruptly show up in shocking, at times violent ways. As a scholar of men's studies, I teach that toxic masculinity is demonstrations of boyhood and manhood that are harmful to oneself and others. In many ways, it is a cocktail of the worst behavior and attitudes a dude can have. It causes him to act without self-control and to perform macho stereotypes. In many instances, it is fueled by presumptions about how men are supposed to act. It is the last feature that was on display at the Oscars. So Will Smith wasn't acting according to what he wanted to do. It was just what he felt he had to do, because we've told men you have to stand up for your wives and you got to go beat up the guy who dares say something to her. But he goes on to say, Rock made a joke about Jada Pinkett Smith, Will Smith's wife, starring in the sequel to the movie G.I. Jane. It was a joke about her appearance. There is a chance that most people interpreted that comment as just that, but I understood it differently. Over the last year, I have watched social media videos of Jada Pinkett Smith talking about struggling with and ultimately coming to terms with her hair loss. Her husband first laughed at the comedian's joke. Jada Pinkett Smith, on the other hand, was visibly annoyed. It could have been that in a split second, her husband recognized that she felt publicly humiliated by a joke about something that has been so personally painful to her. And I will say that, I wouldn't make fun of a woman who was suffering from some condition where she was losing her hair, because that is very humiliating for a lady. You should never make fun of a lady who loses her hair because of chemo or something like that. Now, if she's just shaving her head because she just wants to be more manly, I don't know what to say about that. But you do need to watch out for that, because there are sometimes conditions that are out there, and that is very distasteful to do something like that. So again, obviously I have some suggestions for how Will Smith could have handled this better. I might say more about that later, but here, let's go on with the article. He says, here enters the toxic masculinity. Will Smith storms on stage and slaps the man who insulted his wife. Now watch this. This is about to show us what's really wrong with this dude. He says, I have a spouse whom I deeply love. Honestly, if someone did to him what Rock did to Smith's wife, especially about something I knew was an emotional pain point for him, I would have felt compelled to slap that person too. So I think we found out why this guy is writing about toxic masculinity. He is a you-know-what. So I would not have actually done it, though. Undeniably, a better path would have been for Smith to walk on stage, say to Rock, "You just hurt my wife," and ask him to please apologize. The ideal first step would have been for Smith to ask his wife what she wanted, which maybe he did. So, these, not toxic types, these homo types, they know exactly how to act. They would do better. This is what you all should be doing, folks. This is what they're putting in the LA Times. And so toxic masculinity compels a guy to go immediately into bar fight mode when someone says or does something disrespectful to someone he loves. But what if slapping or fighting someone isn't what the disrespected person wants or needs? Or even if it is, and the person says so, why not take a moment to pursue a range of alternatives to violence? Movies, television shows, video games, other forms of media messages have received all our lives have conditioned us, men, to act in ways that can be violent or otherwise toxic in moments like these. In his acceptance speech for actor and leading role just a few minutes later, Smith said that he is feeling called to be a protector at this time in his life. I suppose that act of violence was his way of protecting his wife. The real men are protectors. Expectation is firmly entrenched in toxic masculinity. Again, as a married man, I get it. I just know that protection doesn't have to be violent. Okay, first off, I don't want to hear about protecting your spouse from a guy who's married to a guy. I don't want to hear about that at all. But are we really? So we are now saying real men are protectors is toxic masculinity? Of course real men are protectors. Of course real men are going to protect their wives. The Bible says we are to give honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel. And so here you have a guy whose wife was insulted and he goes and takes care of business. I mean, I don't have a huge problem with that. I mean, obviously, I think, okay, and this is just my opinion, I don't know. I think he probably humiliated his wife and his whole family. I think probably the better way to have done it is afterwards when they're, having one of their get-togethers or something, Will Smith could have walked up to him with his wife and said, "You're going to apologize right now or I'm going to slap your face." I mean, I think that way probably would have been a little better. There's a lot of ways those things could have been handled. You could try to do it in a way that's not going to humiliate your wife. But I mean, his wife had to be feeling awkward the rest of the evening. And either way, too, said, if it was fake, I see a lot of you in the comments think it was fake. It very well might have been. But if it was, you know what? Actors, these guys, Will Smith won an Oscar for a reason. The guy definitely put on a good performance. And the reason I think it's probably real too is because this guy has displayed throughout his life that he's completely insane and emotionally unstable. His whole family are just absolute freaks for real. I don't even want to talk about all the issues in that family because it's very disturbing. So, if it could have been real, it would have happened with somebody like Will Smith. But, either way, so we have this situation where it was a big spectacle. You have this queer on here using it as a chance to go after toxic masculinity. And what does he do? He throws in this idea that real men are protectors. He's adding this as a trait of toxic masculinity. Men are supposed to be protectors. They are supposed to give honor to their wife as unto the weaker vessel. And so, if a guy is insulting your wife, if a guy's messing with your wife, well, then you know what? You need to go deal with it. His wife didn't need to go up there and slap him. He's got to go do it for him because Chris Rock could probably take her. So, this is just weird. Again, these people have no solutions to this. So let's read a little more. It says, then there's the aftermath with Rock. It's where toxic masculinity is addressed through restorative justice, another concept that social scientists like me often teach and write about. The most important act of restorative justice in this violent confrontation between two black men is to ask Rock what would make this situation right for him. Then having Smith authentically issue an apology and do all he can to meet Rock's expectations for harm repair. On Monday afternoon, Smith did apologize to Rock on Instagram. Recovering from a lifetime of toxic masculinity requires us men to step back and be incredibly mindful of the myriad ways we have been socialized to handle anger in our interactions with other men, women, and genderqueer persons. I don't know what genderqueer means. Thinking honestly about what it is we have been told real men do, and often than doing the opposite. And Will Smith is 53 years old, which confirms that toxic masculinity is not about immaturity. It's not a thing that men naturally grow out of. Some of us embody aspects of it in our entire lives. Understanding what it is and how it shows up in our attitude and behaviors might just save us from inflicting harm on ourselves and others. It could have saved Smith from tarnishing one of the most rewarding nights of his career as he won an Oscar for the first time. Now, an unfortunate and avoidable cloud will forever shadow that moment. And so there you have a just ridiculous article by a dude. Oh, sorry about that. My picture's all messed up. By a dude who has no business talking about masculinity whatsoever. And again, and so what the liberals, all right, any opportunity, it is a mental illness. Any opportunity that they have to just put forth their liberal, foolish ideologies, they jump at it. And so even something like this, where a guy does something that's pretty normal, sticks up for his wife, obviously in a not the best way, in a way that definitely made him look like the psycho that he is. This guy uses it as an opportunity to teach that it is toxic for a man to feel like he should protect his wife. That is absolutely ridiculous, and it just proves these people, they just hate manhood. They hate what drives men. Okay, and there are certain things that drive men, and it's important that we understand these things because some of those things do cause us to sin. And they can get us in trouble. And we're going to talk about some of those things here in a little bit. But again, so when we understand ourselves, though, we can learn how to take those things and channel them for good. They're wanting to take these things, the masculinity, the manhood, and they're just wanting to remove it from man. They're wanting to just remove the backbone of man is basically what they're wanting to do. They're wanting to remove all testosterone from men, and they're wanting to just turn them into these, limp-wristed queers, pretty much. And that is not the solution. That is not right. And so it's important that we are able to see through this stuff. And so I'm gonna show you one more article I think we're gonna go to, because this one's pretty funny too. Another person who all they saw when this thing happened was toxic masculinity back again. And this is by a woman. It says, Will Smith versus Chris Rock shows toxic masculinity always has the last word. Okay. This is funny. I'm telling you, again, liberalism is a mental disorder, and it is really running rampant. And so it says here, it is always about the men. How dare we, after the Oscars, be talking about the men? Well, it was the men that got into a fight. That's the only reason anybody has paid any attention or even talked about the Oscars is because of what happened between two dudes. All right, but you got to make this a gender issue. You got to make this an equality issue. It says the day after the 94th Academy Awards, we're not talking about Jane Campion, the third woman to win the Oscar for Best Director, nor the performance of Jessica Chastain or Ariana DeBose. We're talking about a man who hit another man because he said something about his wife. Even when it's about a woman, it's always about the men, okay? And see, here's another thing too. Everything that, Hollywood, the government has its hands on, it's all about just trying to correct all these societal wrongs, okay? And for example, they think in literally everything, we're going to see an example of this in this article, that there's just to be total equality between men and women, meaning equal outcomes. Whether you're man, woman, black, white, normal, queer, we should always have equal outcomes for everything. Well, that's just not the way life works. That's not the way things work in a free society. And so here she is, keeping track of the third woman to win an Oscar for whatever, and apparently a first colored homo woman won an Oscar for them. And we should all be talking about that. But here's the thing. Nobody cares about that. Nobody cares about that. You people care about that. The news media cares about that. The American people don't care about that. The American people do not care about the first black female Supreme Court justice. Nobody cares about that. Okay? The only reason, everyone knows the only reason, whatever her name is, and I've already forgot it, got picked is because, Biden wants to make history. And so we're going to force history. And instead of just letting it happen, instead of just having a black woman outdo all the white men and other people that are out there, we're just going to go and only select from black women. And then that way we can say we're making progress. History is happening. The Oscars do the same thing. They always have to make sure they give out a certain amount of Oscars to black people, to queer people, to women. They always got to make sure they do these things. It's not real. The selections that they make, they do not represent the popularity of the movie. They don't represent what the fans want, even though, that's where the money comes from. So these things are all just ways for them to, force these things in. They're demanding, pick a colored queer woman to give an Oscar to. And so they do. And then they can go on the news and say, history, first, woman of color that's a queer gets an Oscar. And then we're all supposed to just, everybody's supposed to be excited. But here's the thing, nobody cares. Okay? This right here proves how little people care about all this diversity stuff they're trying to force down everybody's throats, about all this history that they're trying to make happen. People care more about an actor going and slapping a comedian. They literally care more about that than any of this stuff. So when they had their staged event of giving Oscars to different minorities and, people groups and oppressed groups or whatever for the most politically correct films that nobody liked, that nobody cared about, Will Smith apparently got an Oscar too. I've never even heard of the movie that he got an Oscar for. I never even heard of it. I don't even care. Nobody cares. Okay? The world literally cares more about a slap than literally anything else out there. And so here we have this woman writing this article who thinks that all this stuff of women getting nominated for all these things is real. The stuff that the news media wants to talk about. She thinks it's all real. And so all she can see when these two dudes slap each other, or the one dude slaps another dude, is how dare they steal the show from this other thing. Nobody cared about that show. That's how they were able to do that, because nobody cared about the show. And so when she's saying it's always about the men, it's because in our society today, men would rather watch another guy get slapped than just have all this politically correct junk shoved down our throats. So let me read some more. It says, a bare outline of the facts surround that Jada Pinkett Smith practice will surely be familiar. A woman gets dressed up, go to the party. She probably doesn't want to go, but is being held to celebrate her husband, in this case, Will Smith. She puts on her best smile and jewelry and sucks it up. It's all going to be okay, and always turns into some kind of event, and Chris Rock decides to make a wisecrack about her appearance. Hey, what's with the unfeminine haircut? How dare that even be a joke? Shouldn't it not matter if a woman has short hair? Why can't women look like men? And again, if a woman looks like a man because of some condition, don't make fun of her for it, okay? And there's a lot of things you could hammer Jada Pinkett Smith for. We're not going to make fun of her for a medical condition. But anyway, you don't look so hot anymore. When did you lose your magic? Yeah, because everyone knows that the glory of a woman is long hair. And so, don't make fun of it when a medical treatment makes it go away. But they are offended by the fact that long hair is a glory to a woman. They're offended by that. They don't want it to be that way. They're trying to remove all distinction. And that's why they're offended at the idea that it's a shame. Nature teaches it's a shame for a man to have long hair. But let's keep reading. I paraphrase, but not much. What Rock actually said was, Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2. Can't wait to see it. This was reference to her shaved head. And then talks about her hair loss and all that. But I'm not going to read this whole thing. But anyway, let's go down to here, this last paragraph. So it says, when you watch the initial footage, Smith laughs inanely at the joke while Pinkett Smith gives a withering look and rolls her eyes. Smith appears to only get up to play the big man when he realizes that other people don't find it funny. It's perfectly possible that to defend and amplify a woman without resorting to a tediously attention-seeking protection narrative. But then again, it's also possible to make films this way, and Hollywood has genuinely avoided doing so. And we all know this is not really about Rock disrespecting Smith's wife. It's about Smith feeling disrespected. And yes, that was probably it, but I want you to notice this. Notice she brought up the protection narrative too. And she says, it's also possible to make films this way, and Hollywood has generally avoided doing so. It is, Hollywood now, they are trying to get away from this damsel in distress type thing. We can't have the princes saving the princesses anymore. You don't see that anymore on shows because we have to stop teaching girls that they need protected by men. Well, why not? Okay. And so, and here's the thing. When it comes to toxic masculinity, I'm not going to take time to go. There was an article about what it is. It was written shortly after that stupid Gillette ad came out, but explaining what it is. But it does mention certain behaviors in men, like one of them mentions is catcalling. Okay. Yes, men should not be standing around on the streets, whistling at women, making noises at them, touching them, sexual harassment. That is a bad thing. That is something that men often do. That's not right. It mentions bullying a lot. Okay, obviously we shouldn't go around just beating people up. But another thing it talks about a lot too is homophobia. Okay, I don't have time to talk about that. But again, they always got So what they do, they mention bad things, that are legitimately bad, but then they'll throw in some things that really aren't bad. They will while they're talking about the catcalling and the bullying, they'll talk about this macho appearance thing. Why do guys have to be rugged? Why are we putting out this, this message that men are supposed to be rugged and tough? Because, what if my son is soft and effeminate? What if he's weak and he doesn't want to be that way? But in society, we're demanding that our men be tough when maybe they don't want to be. We're demanding they go play sports. Well, maybe they don't want to go play sports and all this type of stuff. And basically what we're doing is we're saying, what about that kid that wants to be a queer? And folks, I don't believe that we ought to promote that. If you've got a boy who wants to play with dolls, you need to teach him that's not cool. You teach him that's not okay. If he wants to dress like a girl, that's a problem. And you need to work that out. But folks, that's considered toxic masculinity. And we've got to understand that it is true. There are some things that men do that could be considered toxic. Men can tend to be violent. Okay. Violence is not a good thing. Okay. I do think Will Smith's slap, while it looked like it was pretty hard, if he was really intent on committing violence, he would have punched him in the nose. A slap in the face, while it hurts, it actually humiliates more than it hurts. And I think that's why he did that. It's like, you embarrass my wife, I'm going to embarrass you. And so Chris Rock will recover from that slap in the face. But the humiliation, he'll probably never recover from. So that's kind of what the point was of that. So everybody's wanting to talk about violence and stuff. And it's like, there wasn't even any blood. I don't know if that qualifies as violence. But men can be violent. They can be abusive. There are scumbag men out there that are abusive to women and abusive to their wives. There are rapists out there that should be put down like dogs, for sure. I do think people ought to get in trouble for sexual harassment. I don't think that kind of thing should be tolerated at all in the workplace. I do believe that men should be respectful to women. I believe that. Men can be very lustful, and they there's guys out there they just creep women out, the way they look at them, stare them down. I don't think you ought to do that. I don't think you should just sit there eyeballing some woman. I think that's wrong. I think that's inappropriate. I don't think you ought to do that. I think we ought to be respectful. Men often struggle with pride issues and things. And so, it causes them to want to, maybe act in a way that normally they wouldn't because they feel like they have to. That is true. So some of the things that they bring up are partially true, but the problem is their solution. You see, it's men's masculinity. It is that testosterone or whatever you could say that kind of drives men to do some of these things that they do. Okay. Women see a good looking woman, men like good looking women, but the solution is not to teach them to not like them and to teach them to like dudes just as much or something like that. It's not to just, take the testosterone from their body or anything like that. That's not the solution. The solution is to teach them character. The solution is to teach them self-control. The solution is to teach them some respect. That's the solution. We shouldn't treat these things like they're weird and that there's something wrong with the man. I remember years ago, I was at Walmart and there was this another pastor in town. It wasn't of a Baptist church, but I knew who this pastor was. And he was at Walmart with his son and his daughter. And he had a boy that was about 12 or 13 years old. And, a lot of times at Walmart, right there, in the magazines and stuff that they have at the checkout, typically there's women on there, on those that are not dressed appropriate. And, this kid, about 12 or 13 years old, he was looking. And I remember I did not like the way the dad handled it. I mean, the dad right there, in front of everybody, just starts getting on to him and yelling at him. But the things I remember he was saying, he was like, what's wrong with you? Why are you looking at that? All this kind of stuff. And the way he was saying these things, he was making it like there was something wrong with him that would make him want to look. It is normal that a man is going to want to look. Don't treat your son like a freak if stuff like that gets his attention. But what you do have to do is you have to teach them to have enough character to look away. We have got to learn and we have got to teach our young men how to have some self-control. It is not wrong to like the taste of Twinkies. It is not wrong to like the taste of soda. But we've got to teach, our children, you don't just eat as much as you feel like. You don't just stuff your face with these things. You got to have some temperance. You've got to be able to control yourself on these things. And obviously, guys are going to like looking at women, but you have to teach them to have the character to restrain themselves from these things and to save themselves and to, save those things, for their wife when they get married. And listen, it's hard today. Okay. It is really hard. There is just stuff everywhere. I mean, you cannot go out in public. And then too, when summer comes, the way people dress, it is hard. But folks, it doesn't change the fact that we do need to teach them character. We do need to teach them self-control, but don't act like they're a freak. Don't act like there's something wrong with your son. There's actually something wrong with your son if he gets to a certain age and he's not attracted to that. That's what when you really have a problem. And a lot of times, moms and dads, and moms especially too, they kind of panic when their son exhibits normal behavior. But the thing is, you don't want to take that desire away. You want to teach them to control it. You want to teach them to have character. You want to teach them these things are sinful. You need to look away from it. When it comes to the violence, when it comes to bullying and things like that, I believe men, they shouldn't be violent, but men should be capable of doing some serious damage. Because you know what? There may be a time where you need to be violent. There might be a time when you do need to physically step in and be that protector for your family. There might be a time when your son needs to step in and be a protector for his sister. You don't know. And so we should promote toughness in our guys. It's okay to teach your boys how to fight and let them go do martial arts training or boxing or whatever. And, that's a macho thing. That's a tough thing. There's nothing wrong if your son, wants to be macho, if he wants to be muscular and all that kind of stuff. Okay. That's good. Okay. That is good. We should promote that, but we got to teach them how to handle these things. Okay. You're strong, but you don't use your strength, to go beat up women. You use your strength to protect women, all right? Because we have respect for them. You got to teach your son. You don't ever hit a girl. You have to teach them those things. But yet today in this woke culture that's promoting all this stuff, trying to make guys effeminate, we're not seeing domestic assault go down. We're not seeing abuse of women go down. None of these things are happening. See, the problem is we're just trying to take away people's masculinity when we should be teaching them morals and character, and that's just not happening. So, the problem with this new talk of toxic masculinity is the solution. Okay, their solution: remove men's masculinity, and that's not right. And so, a father should expect their boys to get wild and aggressive, but they need to teach them to control it. They don't need to remove those things. Sometimes you might need to make your boys go out and chop some firewood or go run a few laps or something when they've just got too much energy. But, don't drug them up. And I'm telling you, that I think that's one of the reasons we have as many of the fruitcakes that we have out there today is because we have so many parents, their boys act like boys. And their solution is let's give them meds, and I think these meds are making them more like girls. And if you go watch that stupid Gillette ad, that's one of the things. Boys will be boys. You got all the guys standing there, in a row, all behind their grill, being macho, grilling their meat. Those toxic men grilling their meat together, saying boys will be boys. Well, the boys are wrestling. And you know what? I just heard a preacher say this today. I was watching a thing, and he said, he's like, the way it was with our boys, we let them roughhouse, and it was fine as long as nobody was bleeding or crying, but we're supposed to act like guys wrestling. Oh, we can't have this. We got to stop this violence. And then they have these boys wrestling on the ground, and then you have like this doughy beta guy come, and he's the one that stops the boys from fighting. And the other thing that was funny on there too is like all the guys that were going to that were disrespecting women, it was always white dudes always being stopped by the black dudes. I mean, this was the most politically correct commercial ever seen in my life. It was absolutely a joke. But the boys will be boys. But you have to teach them how to be men. You have to teach them how to control themselves. And so we should expect our boys to be interested in girls. But you have to teach them how to control themselves. And so, because there's something wrong, when a man is not attracted to a woman. But you have to teach them how to control their lust. And folks, in the near future, I am planning on doing some programs speaking specifically about pornography. Okay? That is a horrible, horrible thing. That is a stronghold in many men's lives. And man, let me just throw this in here. Don't ever get involved in that stuff. Do not get involved in that in any way at all. Men need to be taught that women are to be protected. Unlike these articles promoting, acting like that's toxic to want to protect women. No, it is not. We are supposed to protect women. We need to teach them that purity is a virtue in women and it's valuable. And while I believe men should be kind to all women, but at the same time, and I believe we should be respectful to all women, but I don't believe we should have respect for hussies. And that's one of the problems that we have today. One of the reasons women act the way they do today is because they feel like they have to be accepted by men. No, we should honor women who are virtuous, who are pure, all those things. That is a good thing, okay? Men, those of you that are married, you should treat other women like in the church, like the Bible says, like a younger sister with all purity. And we should we should give honor to, especially our wives, especially our daughters, but all the women that are around us. And when there is a godly woman that is out there, when you have them in your church, you should point at these women and you should tell your girls, these are the kind of women that you ought to be like. These are good, wonderful, godly ladies. And while we live in a world today that just, mainly just looks at the outward, makes a big deal about the appearance, the Bible talks about, and I preached on this Sunday night, as a jewel of gold in a swine's snout, so is a fair one without discretion. We've got to start promoting more of these godly virtues. And I believe women would do better in this area if men honored those kind of women. If those were the women that were lifted up, if they were the ones that were respected, if they were the ones that got married to the good guys and they were well taken care of, if they were the ones that were protected, if they were the ones who were cherished, women who, were chaste and pure and, displayed all those godly virtues, I'm telling you right now, I think it would make a difference. But you know what? We've got men today, even married men, they're always looking at the hussy. They're always paying attention to the hussy. That's the one that they're talking about. And then we wonder why, our daughters, want to act that way, dress that way, do their hair that way. We wonder why our wives are insecure in these things. We've got to stop paying attention to people like that. And we've got to start focusing more on the godly. And so if men really are the leaders, then men need to take responsibility and acknowledge their role in allowing women to get the way they are today. Because let's just face it, folks, the women of today, this generation, it's not good. Okay? It is not good. Feminism, and let me just say this, all right? Now, y'all hear me out on this. This is going to probably trigger some ladies out there. If y'all are listening, you're not supposed to be listening. This is for men. But feminism is ruining women, okay? The more feminism succeeds in advancing and becoming a part of our society, the more we're going to see women on all kinds of, medications, taking hormones to turn themselves into men. The more we're just going to see these Ellen DeGenerate types and, all the just, Rosie O'Donnells and disgusting freaks that are out there. The more we're going to see these. But here's the thing about feminism. I blame men for feminism. I do. I blame men for feminism. And here's why. Because for one, men are the leaders. Everything rises and falls on leadership. But also, here's what you got to understand too. We've got this there, and I have ran into many of these people, and I'm disgusted by you. There are many of these beta male types, and they don't think they're beta males, but they are. These beta male types that are out there today that have absolutely no respect for women. They're very kind of have a hostile attitude towards women. These are the guys that binge watch every sermon they can find on women keeping silence and loud and stubborn women and stuff like that. And I'm all for those sermons, but some of these guys who binge watch those things, and that's always what they're sharing. That's always where they're leaving comments and stuff. I've got you people pegged. Okay. Here's what these men resent. They resent living in a society where they can't get married and be a sorry husband and not take care of their wife, and without her still not being able to leave him. They want to be able to be abusive. They want to be worthless, and her to not be able to do anything about it. And let me tell you, when it was a man's world, I think many of our laws were technically better. I think things were mostly better in many ways. But you know what? A lot of men took advantage of the fact that it was very hard to get divorced. They took advantage of the fact that it was very hard for women to make it, for women to get jobs and all those things. They took advantage of that, and they cheated on their wives. The woman couldn't do anything. She felt trapped. She had all these kids. It was harder to get welfare back in the day. It was hard. It was hard to get divorced. The chances of ever getting remarried were pretty rare, and it was a man's world. And so he could take advantage of that and be a sorry husband, violate his marriage vows, and she wasn't really able to do anything about it. As a result of that, a lot of women got fed up with it. Guys who weren't taking care of them, guys who weren't taking care of the kids, guys who weren't being faithful to their wife. And you know what? It made women, it's like, you know what? Forget this. I'm going to go figure out how I can provide for myself. I'm going to figure out, we need to start figuring out ways that we can take care of and we can survive without men. And the truth is, they weren't made to survive without men. But you know what else? They weren't made to live with bums who cheat on them and won't take care of them. They weren't made to do that. But because as a society, when it was a man's world, we didn't hold men accountable, when they would do those things. It created a movement. And now they've taken over, and now a woman can divorce her husband even if he hasn't cheated on her. Even if he has been providing for her and taking care of her. She can find another guy that she likes better. Good night. She could find a woman that she likes better today, and she could leave him and still get custody of the kids, still get alimony. And you got guys out there that they just hate that so much. And so, they're never going to get married or whatever. Well, you know what? I personally think if you were a real man, you would just go out there, you'd find a woman, and you'd take good care of her, and she wouldn't want to leave you. But, the truth is, you're so sorry and pathetic that in a world where women can leave their husband, anyone that you would ever get would leave you in a heartbeat. And that is the fact of the matter right there. You are just not a man any woman would ever voluntarily stay with. And so you need to live in a world where they are forced to stay with you. And listen, I don't believe in divorce. I think divorce is a terrible thing. I think our laws are messed up in this country. But I will say this, that you know what? I don't need the law to make my wife stay with me. I don't have to have that. I don't need the law to step in to make my wife submit to me. I don't need that. And if you're a good leader, you don't need that. And I'm telling you right now, I believe if men would step up and we would fulfill our role the way the Bible says, where we love our wife, give honor as unto the weaker vessel, where we cherish them, where we are protecting them, where we are providing for them and meeting their needs. If we would do these things, then, I believe other women are going to want men like that. And I think feminism would probably go away. There's always going to be some evil women out there, promoting these things. But the thing is, women who are married to good men, they hear this feminist stuff and they just scoff at it. They're repulsed by it. They're not even tempted to go that direction. And I'm losing viewers right now with this stuff. It's all the betas leaving that can't handle this, but they just can't handle the fact they are the problem. Okay. They are their problem. They have to have a society where women can't leave them, because that's just how pathetic they are. And you know what? If it'll make you feel better, go binge watch my sermons preaching at women. I preach at the women sometimes too, but it's not going to do you one bit of good. You need to go listen where I'm preaching at the men. That's what you need right now. And so we've got men. It's time for men to just step up and start taking care of women like they're supposed to. It's time that they be that protector. And you know what? I'm not going to listen to the world when they say that stuff's toxic. Yeah, I'm the strong one in the house. I'm the protector in the house. I'm the one that does the manly stuff. I'm the one that does the heavy lifting. That kind of stuff's not up to my wife. And so I'm not going to promote this idea of stripping men of their masculinity. If I see, my boys are grown up now, but when I would see aggressive behavior in them, I said, I didn't care as long as it wasn't like doing some kind of irreversible damage. Okay. Obviously, you almost promote a lot of stuff. I used to wrestle with them. I used to fight with them. Why? You want to teach them to be tough. You want to teach them to be macho. Let them, when they get old enough, let them buy guns and knives and all these things and do all this stuff that, not supposed to promote because that's just toxic. No, we're going to promote these things. We're going to, teach your kids, boys, to go out there and kill an animal and gut it. These are good. These are not toxic things. But at the same time, too, when you see the masculinity in your boys start manifesting itself in sinful ways, okay, just understand that the solution is not to take away their masculinity. The solution is teach them character. And I personally think that as men, we ought to be able to beat people up. That doesn't mean we should go around doing it. We should have self-control, and I think Will Smith, again, I think he should have went backstage afterwards, looked at Chris Rock, said, I highly recommend you apologize to my wife. If you don't, it's going to get ugly. Let him know it's coming. And then if he doesn't after that, then he can belt him one, I guess. That's fine. So sometimes there's a time for violence. There's a time where these things need to take place, but it is okay to do it. There are things that men do. The Bible uses the term like a man. It says, gird up your loins like a man. In Job chapter 40 in verse 7. In 1 Corinthians 16:13, it says, watch ye, stand fast in the faith. Quit you like men. Be strong. Throughout time, there has been behavior associated with men, and it's not just a Christian thing. Okay? It's a man thing. Now, that was a verse that Paul wrote to the church, but it's not just a Christian thing, it's a man thing. We also see that phrase used in 1 Samuel 4:9 with the Philistines. They were a wicked people. They were a godless people, but they said in a battle, be strong and quit yourselves like men, O ye Philistines. So even the Philistines, they did. There was a man code that they had back then. And quit you like men just means don't quit, or don't quit until the job's done. And there's always been certain behaviors associated with men. And one of those things is men are the protectors. And yes, along with that, men have often struggled with the inappropriate behavior, the catcalling, all that kind of stuff. That's not right, but that's where they do that though, because instinctively, so when a man looks at a good-looking woman, he thinks some thoughts that are inappropriate. And so he just, if a guy's just giving in to his baser instincts, he's going to do that stuff. But the thing is, I don't have a problem that a guy has an attraction and an interest in a woman. I have a problem with a guy who just can't control his behavior. And so you've got to teach your boys when you see that kind of thing. That's not what you do. When that kind of stuff appears, you need to have enough character to look away. That's what you need to do. And if you'll do that, maybe when these guys become adults, maybe they will be able to control themselves. And maybe they won't be out there raping women and abusing women or getting married and treating their wife terrible. That kind of stuff's not good. And so I want to encourage everyone out there today to continue being masculine, to continue displaying those predominantly male traits, but don't sin. Okay? And those things that you're naturally prone to do, recognize these things as sin and ask the Lord to help you control yourself on those things, help you develop character. We don't want our young men to lose their attraction that they have for women, but we do want them to be able to control their lusts. That's what we're looking for. We do, as men, we want to have the ability to beat the snot out of someone and to destroy if necessary. But we also want to have the character and the self-control to walk away when we need to walk away. And so let's keep our focus right in these things. And I believe if we do that, we will be a better society, and we won't be a family of freaks like the Smiths. And obviously, Will Smith is not an example of, real manly behavior. He's a guy who kind of lost control. And so we shouldn't be surprised that, he's got a son that wears dresses. And And that's the least of their problems. I didn't even talk about the worst of the Smiths' problems because I don't really want to talk about it. That's how bad these people are. But I did want to just kind of use this situation everyone's talking about and using it as an excuse to bring up toxic masculinity, to just talk about how to navigate through that. Because yes, there are things they will bring up that are in fact sinful behavior, but let's keep the masculinity, but also have self-control and character. And that is the solution. So I appreciate you all watching this. Thank you so much. We will see you all next time.